they got caught up in all the hype. And if Tupac came back from the dead now to hear this interview, he would agree. They got caught up in the hype. And Public Enemy prophesies, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype.
So I went out there, and like when I walked in, these two big-ass Rockwallers came, and then Suge, you know, he comes out the back. They come running around, sniffing around me and stuff, sits down with his cigar, sits his cigar down and does this. And both the dogs ran and sat down next to him. So I'm like, okay, this one of them meetings. He said, well, what you want? A $400,000 advance. Why you ain't just simply say $500,000? Man, you Big Daddy Kane, man. I can't see myself signing you for less than $1 million. I gotta give you $1 million. Because you're already a household name. But then he was like, well, yo, look, I don't know how you doing financially, but you know, if you want, you know, I can just give you $100K in the morning. That's when I knew it was time to go. I was like, you just gonna give me $100,000 with no agreement? Nah, I was like, I'll let you know tomorrow.
KRS-One is clearing the air about Big Daddy Kane and Tupac's relationship, and it's not what people have been led to believe. For years, fans thought Kane and Pac were enemies, but KRS says that couldn't be further from the truth. They didn't hate each other at all. In fact, they had major respect. So where did all that beef talk even come from? One name, Suge Knight. Suge was a master at playing puppet master, spinning stories, and forcing people to pick sides. He thrived on East Coast versus West Coast tension because it sold records, sold magazines, and kept all eyes glued to the drama. But Kane wasn't built for that fake chaos. He never wanted to play into Suge's media circus. Tupac, on the other hand, was dragged into it whether he liked it or not. And that's where the illusion of bad blood came from. KRS hinted that any so-called tension wasn't real at all. It was straight up manipulation. Kane even got approached to sign with Death Row, but he turned it down. And that one decision made him a piece on Suge's chessboard, a storyline he never even asked to be part of. Imagine being written into a beef you never agreed to. Behind the cameras, though, Kane and Pac were actually cool. There was genuine respect between them, real conversations nobody ever heard about, and even talks of collabs that never made it to record. The industry may have tried to paint them as rivals, but the truth, they were more like quiet allies, hidden from the spotlight while the world ate up the lies. Back in the mid-90s, Suge Knight was plotting his next power move, the launch of Death Row East. This was Suge's way of stretching his empire across the map, trying to plant his flag in the East Coast market, and who better to front that expansion than one of Brooklyn's most respected legends, Big Daddy Kane. According to Kane himself, the offer was flashy, a $100,000 advance plus a deal that could have changed the whole trajectory of his career. But here's the twist, Kane didn't bite. He straight up turned it down, saying he wasn't about to play into the industry's games. That single choice put him in the rare position of being neutral while the East Coast versus West Coast war started to boil over. Kane saw the trap coming from a mile away. He knew no label, especially not Suge Knight's, was just handing out six figures with no hidden strings. He looked at that bag and knew it came with a price tag on his soul. Kane wasn't about to sell himself out to a man who thrived on chaos. And here's the part the industry didn't want fans to know. This wasn't just about business. By rejecting Death Row East, Kane also rejected Suge's plan to pit him directly against Tupac. KRS-One later made it clear Kane never had beef with Pac. None. Zero. The two actually respected each other more than most rappers respected their own peers. Sadly, Pac got swept into the tornado of hype, headlines, and stage rivalries that Suge kept feeding to the press. While Kane dodged the setup, Pac ended up drowning in the very storm Suge created. The East Coast versus West Coast machine that changed hip-hop forever. From the very start, Big Daddy Kane recognized Tupac's raw gift, and he always stood up for him. Whenever critics tried to downplay Pac and say he wasn't a real lyricist, Kane wasn't having it. He made it clear Pac could hold his own with anybody. And here's the proof most fans don't even know about. There's an unreleased track they recorded together called Wherever You Are. It never officially dropped, but those who've heard it say Pac went bar for bar with Kane, a living legend, and held his ground. Anybody still doubting Pac's pen would have to swallow their words after hearing that session. But Kane and Pac shared more than just music. They were also connected through the teachings of the 5% Nation, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earths. Born in Harlem during the 1960s, this movement preached that black people are the original people of the planet, and that true power comes from self-knowledge and enlightenment. Kane was tapped in early, all the way back in the 80s. You can hear it layered in his lyrics, subtle references to supreme mathematics and the supreme alphabet. It wasn't just wordplay, it was wisdom coded into his rhymes, making them sharper, deeper, and more meaningful if you caught the references. Even tracks like The Wrath of Cain carried that flavor. Knowledge mixed with bravado, giving his verses a weight most rappers couldn't match. That's the part a lot of people miss. Kane and Pac weren't just two artists passing through the same era. They were linked by ideas, philosophy, and respect that went way deeper than the headlines ever showed. When it came to Tupac, his ties to the 5% Nation were different from Kane's. Pac was never officially initiated, but he got exposed to the teachings early on. First in Baltimore, and then through his mother, Afeni Shakur, who had been a proud and fearless Black Panther. Pac soaked up that revolutionary energy from her. Ideas about self-knowledge, empowerment, and fighting back against oppression. And you could see it everywhere, in his interviews, in his speeches, and definitely in his music. So even though Kane was repping Brooklyn and Pac was holding it down out west, the two actually shared the same mental blueprint. Their philosophies lined up. Both saw knowledge and truth as power. That connection gave them a quiet respect for one another, even while the industry kept trying to make them look like enemies. But here's where things turned scandalous. Suge Knight wasn't just running a label, he was running a narrative. Death Row was printing money, and Suge knew one thing better than anyone. Nothing sells like conflict. He saw the East Coast versus West Coast beef as the ultimate marketing tool, and he was willing to manufacture it if he had to. That's where Kane came in. Suge's move with the Death Row East offer wasn't just business, it was chess. He wanted Kane, a respected East Coast kingpin, pulled right into the West Coast narrative. But when Kane refused, it didn't just keep him out of the label, it flipped the script. Suddenly, Kane became this unpredictable wild card. Neutral, but not really neutral. Because in Suga's world, even refusing to pick a side could be twisted into a headline. And that was Suga's real genius. He could make silence feel like betrayal, and neutrality feel like a statement. Tupac didn't have the option of sitting this one out. The second he signed to Death Row, he became Suge Knight's golden weapon, the flagship artist of the whole empire. And with that role came baggage. The East Coast versus West Coast feud wasn't just hip-hop drama anymore, it became Pac's brand. Everywhere you looked, magazines, TV specials, radio interviews, Pac was painted as the face of the war. And yes, Pac was naturally outspoken, fiery, and unfiltered, but a lot of the beef we saw was pumped up, exaggerated, and sometimes flat out manufactured by the machine behind him. KRS-One saw it for what it was. That's why he never jumped into the circus. He kept calling out how the industry was exploiting Black artists, turning real people into storylines just to cash in on blood, sweat, and pain. But here's the part people forget. Suge wasn't pulling the strings alone. The entire record industry in the 90s was layered with players who had something to gain. Executives, A and R reps, and media outlets were all eating off the same plate. Drama meant money, a beef meant boosted record sales, glossy magazine covers flying off shelves, and TV ratings shooting through the roof, and sometimes it went even deeper. Artists were pressured to throw shots at each other, or worse, their interviews got chopped and twisted so it looked like beef where none existed. The machine thrived on illusion, and Pac was caught dead in the middle of it. Kane and Pac were the perfect examples of this trap. Two powerful lyricists, both respected, both rooted in philosophy and culture. Behind closed doors, they gave each other respect. But in the public eye, the industry tried to turn that respect into rivalry because nothing sold better than war. The crazy part is, the industry spun the story so hard, it looked like the total opposite of reality. Suge and his allies knew exactly what they were doing. Conflict kept fans glued to every headline, every music video, every diss track. And as long as people were eating it up, they were lining executives' pockets with record sales and hype money. And it wasn't just Suge. Bad Boy and other East Coast power players had their fingerprints all over the feud, stoking fires on their side too. But Suge stood out because his tactics were the loudest and the scariest. He ruled with intimidation, loyalty tests, and street clout, making sure no artist on his roster dared step out of line. Tupac, with that fiery personality and explosive temper, was the perfect weapon for Suge's strategy. Pac's raw energy made every headline bigger, every diss hit harder, and every rumor sound believable. Meanwhile, Kane played it different. calm, cautious, refusing to let himself get used as anyone's pawn. But even his silence became twisted by the press into some new angle of the story. While fans were busy picking sides and buying into fake rivalries, the real business of the industry rolled on quietly. Executives were securing contracts that locked artists in for years, skimming money off collabs and pushing albums designed to maximize profits. The feud wasn't just selling music, it was selling hype, attention, and influence on a massive scale. That's why the Kane and Tupac story hits so hard. It shows the blueprint of how labels turned real people into chess pieces and how the truth got buried under the lies the industry fed to the world. It's a wake-up call that the history we've been fed about hip-hop is far from the full truth. The chaos of the East Coast versus West Coast feud made the industry billions, but the artists caught in the storm, they were the ones paying the price with their lives, their reputations, and their freedom. Looking back at the 90s, you can see it plain as day. This wasn't just about two coasts or two cliques throwing shots at each other. It was a carefully scripted drama, with Suge Knight acting like one of the main directors, pulling strings behind the curtains while executives, magazines, and TV stations cashed in on the spectacle. And here's the twist that gets buried. Kane and Tupac didn't fit that script. Their connection, built on mutual respect and shared philosophies, didn't feed the feud machine, so the industry let it fade into the background. That's why their bond barely gets talked about today, because it didn't sell chaos, and chaos was the only thing the suits cared about. And this is where the story gets even dirtier. The media didn't just report on the East Coast versus West Coast feud, they fed it, they shaped it, and they made sure the peaceful moments got buried under the noise. Think about it. How many magazine covers ever showed Kane and Pac showing respect? None. But the second there was a hint of conflict, it was splashed across every front page in bold letters. Executives knew the formula, and the media played right along. A smile, a handshake, a backstage conversation, those things didn't sell copies. But a rumor of beef? That was gold. The industry would even cut and twist interviews to make rappers look like they were throwing shots, when really they were just speaking their truth. Suddenly, artists who had no problem with each other were cast as rivals, whether they wanted it or not. That's why the Kane and Pac story matters so much. Their respect didn't fit the script, so it got erased from the mainstream narrative. Instead, fans were spoon-fed the image of Pac as Suge's fiery attack dog and Kane as the aloof East Coast veteran refusing to play ball. The truth that these two men actually had common ground was left on the cutting room floor, while the world ate up a war that was never as black and white as it seemed. By the time Pac was deep in death row, his image wasn't even fully his anymore. It was the industry's weapon. Every outburst, every heated lyric, every street confrontation was amplified and turned into proof that he was the poster child for the feud. And once that label stuck, Pac couldn't shake it off. No matter how much of his heart and soul went into making music about love, pain, and social justice, the scary part, that image became bigger than the man himself. The media painted him as reckless, angry, and dangerous. And the more they pushed that narrative, the more doors closed around him. Suddenly, Pac wasn't just a rapper, he was the face of a war that had no off switch. Meanwhile, Kane, the man who had refused to sell his soul into the drama, stood outside of the fire. His caution kept him safe, but Pac was too far in. Suge, the media, and the label system all knew that Pac's fiery nature made him the perfect lightning rod for their agenda. He was passionate, explosive, and unpredictable, exactly what they needed to keep the cameras rolling and the records flying off shelves. And that's the tragedy. The same raw spirit that made Pac one of the most powerful voices in hip-hop also made him the perfect target for an industry that thrived on conflict. By the end, it wasn't just the streets closing in on him. It was the entire machine that had turned him into a symbol of a war he never truly owned. And that's the painful truth. Kane and Tupac's story proves that hip-hop history isn't just about bars, beats, or even beef. It's about how the industry turned human lives into pawns on a chessboard. Kane refused to play the game, and because of that, he survived with his legacy intact. Tupac, on the other hand, got locked into a script written by Suge, the labels, and the media, and it cost him everything. The East Coast versus West Coast war wasn't just about music. It was a spectacle carefully staged to sell records and boost ratings, and it left one of the greatest artists of all time trapped in a role he never asked for. Pac became the face of chaos, while his deeper truth, his revolutionary spirit, his respect for artists like Kane, his commitment to empowering his people, was drowned out by the noise. And that's the part the industry doesn't want to talk about. They'll sell the beef, they'll replay the shots fired, they'll profit off the drama forever, but the moments of unity, the brotherhood, the real philosophies that connected artists like Kane and Pac, those get erased because peace doesn't sell. So the next time you hear about legendary beefs, ask yourself, was it really hate, or was it just another storyline cooked up to keep us buying in? If you're ready to hear the stories the industry doesn't want you to know, you're in the right place. This is BarzBuzz, where the truth behind hip-hop's biggest legends finally comes to light.